Aloha and welcome to the video on conservation biology. For this video, our goals are to define what conservation biology is, describe how people are reducing air and water pollution, and finally to discuss how people are protecting threatened and endangered habitats. So first up, we should define what conservation biology is. And conservation biology uses ecological information to understand how to rescue and restore damaged ecosystems. So recognizing that what the ecosystem should be like, what the impact of humans is, and then how we can restore that and reduce the further impact on those ecosystems. And some of the ways we do that are we control the amount of trash and pollution that we're putting out there. We can start limiting habitat destruction, and we can actually even start creating reserves, which are pockets where we try and preserve that native ecosystem and the wildlife that's associated with there. Okay, so we have a bunch of different issues in the ecosystem that we have to look at. The first one we'll look at is pollution on land. And pollution on land, what we're talking about is trash, and primarily putting it and keeping it in landfills. The problem with that is we're destroying habitats to make these landfills, and then we have to make sure that we're containing all of the trash in there. And one of the ways that we can help this is if we start recycling things like paper, plastic, metals, and things that would go into the trash. If they don't make it that far, if they're reused, then we don't have such the big need for a landfill. The next issue is air quality. And when we're talking about air quality, a lot of it is going to be these waste gases that we're producing as emissions. And some of these gases can get out into the environment. They form with the rain, and what we make acid rain. We can also get rid of some of the ozone, and we saw that ozone was important because that protects us from ultraviolet radiation. And also it can increase the amount of greenhouse gases, and that's one that we're seeing here an awful lot of. So how do we deal with this? Well, we kind of have to agree, and governments have to agree to control the emissions from cars and industries. So if we stop putting the gases out there, then we can recognize the fact that we are changing the atmosphere. And if we recognize that fact, then we can start limiting that change that we're having. Okay, next up we have to talk about water quality. When we're talking about water quality, the big one is this liquid waste from industries and farms called runoff that gets into our fresh water supply. So the best thing we can do there is we can start to regulate this amount of runoff and try and reduce or eliminate it altogether and protect our freshwater supplies. Another issue is land development, and land development is important because as our population grows, we need to have more space, and as we have more space, we're removing trees, and that's leading towards deforestation. We're also destroying natural and native habitats. So one of the things we can do is we're noticing now that there's landscape ecology, and what that does is that's going to develop the land with as much of a reduction in the impact on the ecosystem as it possible. So instead of going in and cutting down all the trees, they kind of cut down some of the trees, maintain some of the trees, maintain some of the wooded lands, and they're trying to expand or have our land development but without damaging the ecosystem as much as we have been. Okay, and then finally we have our issue of living things. And one of them is that organisms, if they move out of their natural ecosystems, they have to go somewhere. And sometimes they survive, sometimes they don't, they go extinct. And sometimes we're bringing them from one place, putting them into another as an introduced species. So the best way to deal with that is to try and limit this habitat destruction. So if we don't have a need to move these species and we don't have a pressure on the species, then it's going to be better off for them. We can also protect species this way, and then we start to develop these recovery plans to try and help them heal. So these are a lot of the issues that we're dealing with human impacts in the ecosystem, and they all have things that we can do to make it better. We might not be able to eliminate the issue, but if we can make it better, it'll be better off for us in the long run. One of the hot topics you'll hear a lot about is biodiversity, and that's the amount of different living things, different living species that are out there. And part of that, because of our negative impacts that we've been covering, we can see how we're putting additional pressures on some of these species that they shouldn't have to deal with or wouldn't deal with without us being here. So we've driven several into the threatened range where there's the threat that they could be, if we keep doing what we're doing, eventually they'll become endangered and then ultimately extinct. So threatened means that they're threatened, we're encroaching on their habitat, we're making their life difficult. Endangered means that we really need to step in if we want to try and preserve these species and this biodiversity that we see out there. Okay, so that's it for this video. As always, good luck with the lessons. They'll go into a lot more detail than what we covered in this short video, and we'll see you in the next video.